Hey guys, just wanted to do a quick video on the hot new research paper that's making the rounds everywhere. Yep, I'm talking about this paper, Beyond the Status Quo, a critical assessment of lifecycle investment advice. It's been featured on marketwatch.com. Throw away those target date funds and don't hold bonds at all, says this daring new research. It's been discussed at length at bogleheads.org, even on Reddit, on many different country-based finance subreddits like Japan Finance and even the German Finance subreddit. And finally, Bloomberg, you're better off going all in on stocks and bonds. New research finds. And of course, for those of you who have yet to start getting investing and want to start, use one of the links below, fund an account, a Wealthsimple or Questrade account, and they'll give you bonus money to get you started well on your way. So definitely check those out. So in many of my previous videos, I mentioned that I'll be XEQT 100% for now, 100% equities, and then over time I might decrease it and add some bonds. It's called the gliding path, some people would call it. It's actually something that a lot of people use. It's very popular approach to investing. That's how I had planned. I imagined I might approach the RESP for my daughter as she gets closer to using those funds and maybe shift it more into bonds. And on my screen is, again, a typical sort of target date fund that gradually, automatically adapts itself as you age. So as you grow older, whether it's like a secure balance or a more aggressive growth path here where you start with a higher amount of equities, ultimately you sort of slide until you have less and less equities and more fixed income. And this paper, aptly called Beyond the Status Quo, is trying to challenge it, goes against this conventional wisdom of having more bonds over time. Now, if you just surface level read about this paper or hear about this paper, you might not get all the value all the juice that you can get from this paper. Because on Reddit, I've seen people like, oh, obviously we know stocks perform better. I didn't really learn anything new, but there's a few interesting nuggets within. I encourage everyone to read or go through this paper, but if you don't really want to, this is why I'm here, to give you like a quick little overview and what my quick takeaways are. But another thing that you definitely want to check out is the Rational Reminder podcast, because Scott Cederberg, one of the contributors to this paper, will be a guest on that podcast and to talk about this paper. So I'm going to try my best here. The paper is really analyzing a U.S. couple and has a lot of reasonable assumptions about what they do post-retirement, having a 4% withdrawal rate and things like that. And because the U.S. data is so small, they've decided to use data that spans 38 developed countries and nearly 2,500 years of country month return data to be able to simulate all these different outcomes. And they do that while comparing 4 different strategies. If I scroll down here, a representative TDF strategy, that's a target date fund strategy, a 100% government bill strategies that mimics a money market fund, a 100% domestic stock strategy, and a 50% domestic stocks and 50% international stock strategy. And I'm just going to jump to the conclusion real quick here. We find that a constant allocation of 50% to domestic stocks and 50% to international stocks throughout one's lifetime dominates QDIAs in all retirement outcomes. So a QDIA, it stands for Qualified Default Investment Alternative, is a type of investment option typically used in employment-sponsored retirement plans like 401ks. It's a default investment choice for participants who do not make an active choice about how to invest their retirement contributions. So usually this is target date funds. So target date funds, again, like really mixes or glides, has a glide structure where you slowly add more bonds. And this is saying in all retirement outcomes, a full equity portfolio outperforms it. And it's nothing new that the research shows that you're going to have the worst drawdown periods with 100% stocks. You know, can you handle 100% stocks when it potentially goes down 40% or 50% during that process? Are you able to hold until retirement and past retirement? And that's where, there is more volatility risk with stocks, but it is mitigated by longevity risk, because your investment time doesn't just stop once you retire. Like me, I'm 38. It doesn't stop once I hit 65. There's longevity risk because I might outlive my savings. So what if I live beyond 85, if I go to 95? Who knows with new technology, I'm able to touch 100 or something. So I'm gonna need possibly higher return than I'm expecting from, like, let's say a mix of bonds and stocks that I need because I live longer than I expect to. And if you live longer, you sort of mitigate that volatility risk. It matters a bit less. And another mitigating factor is every time there's like a crash, the stock market has shown lower prices lead to higher expected returns. But for those expected returns to be eventually realized, you need a really long time horizon. But when you think about, like, again, I'm going to put myself 65, 38 to 65, that's another 27 years. And then what if I live until 95? That's another 30 years. So that's a long time horizon to be in 100% stocks, to be able to ride that volatility. And here it talks specifically about bonds. The diversification benefits of bonds also depend on horizon. They estimate a correlation of 0.18 between 1 month real returns on domestic stocks and bonds. This correlation increases to 0.46 at a 30-year horizon. However, such that bonds offer less diversification benefit for long horizon investors while giving low average returns. International stocks, in contrast, offer high average returns and better diversification with a 30-year correlation between real returns on domestic stocks and international stocks of 0.35. So they're higher returns and less correlated in this 30-year window that I'm interested in, right? This 30-year correlation. And that's why it's international. That's why there's that 50% mix is outperforming, because that international stocks is actually providing better diversification in bonds, even though it's still stocks, which is like a pretty cool finding on this analysis of this empirical data. And in this last paragraph here, it talks about finally, retirement savers and retirees may be rightfully concerned about the possibility that the stock market will perform poorly during their lifetime. When domestic equity does poorly, bonds and bills also tend to do poorly. Fixed income does not offer an adequate safe haven against poor equity outcomes over the long run. And I know recently, because of COVID and how both stocks and inflation, both stocks and bonds completely got crushed, people felt this sort of experience. And it's interesting to see over even a long sample size, a long time horizon, we're seeing how that bonds don't really protect you as much as they should. So if they don't, might as well mix in that international stocks, which has higher returns. There's one more cool thing I wanted to talk about, where it mentions an allocation strategy of 50% to US stocks and 50% to international stocks is roughly in line with global equity market weights, which should be appealing to American investors, as we talked about in my previous video about the market portfolio. So it makes perfect sense to have this as one of the strategies they analyze for a US investor. For a lot of us Canadians, holding 50% domestic, does that make sense? Like, that's heavy home bias, as we know the Canadian only holds roughly 4%, 3 to 4% of the global market cap. But here it says for investors in out of country, an even allocation across domestic and international stocks would represent a strong home bias. In the internet appendix, we demonstrate that reducing the domestic stock weight to 35% and investing 65% internationally produces small performance improvements relative to the stocks one strategy, which is the 50-50 strategy. This 35% domestic weight remains a large home bias for non-US investors, but we show that further reductions in domestic investments come at a cost of worse performance. As such, our results suggest that non-US investors should have a home bias in their equity portfolio. Now, I've heard that they might get into it on the Rational Reminder podcast as to exactly why there's this finding. And it's interesting because we see on many forums, a lot of forums are like, oh, VQT and XQT have too much home bias. And because they're different than the market cap weights, but there's a lot of data that shows like it doesn't matter as much as people think. And here it's even saying 35% is roughly the number based on the metrics they're looking at for retirement. So we're gonna have to wait. I look forward to that episode, and of course I'm just gonna listen and get all the takeaways and present it to you guys in a quick fashion if I can. But definitely look out for that episode. And with that, crazy paper. It's crazy that there's constant research and papers being done. It's important to stay at the forefront and stay informed. But yeah, with that, I'll see you in the next one.